Welcome back and thanks for stopping by for a very special video. This is a tribute to Phil Lynott, who passed away on the 4th of January 1986. So today would be his anniversary. So with Phil Lynott, I just want to talk about first his name and the pronunciation. So for years I always called him Phil Lynott, and people in Ireland, that's just the way we pronounced his surname. But his two daughters appeared on a special of the Late Late Show about 2.5 years ago, when his movie was being released. I think it was Songs for While I'm Away is the title of the movie. A great movie, documentary. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But his two daughters, Sarah and Kathleen, were on being interviewed, and the host asked the question, how should we pronounce his name? What did he prefer? Was it Lynott or Lynott? And they both said Lynott. So from that day, I've always pronounced Phil's name as Phil Lynott, because they said that that's the way their mum had told them that he preferred to be pronounced. So look, that's what I go with. I know a lot of Irish people still call him Phil Lynott, and that's absolutely fine. I think the important thing here is to remember the impact that Phil had on music in Ireland, and particularly rock and roll, and then later on heavy metal. I think he was a trailblazer. If you look at his whole life, obviously grew up in Dublin and went to school, but he was completely different from all the other children in his class because he was black. His father was Brazilian, his mother was Irish. He was born in England because his mother and father were not married, and having a child out of wedlock back then was not considered. Ireland was very much in the grip of the Catholic Church back in the 1930s and 40s, and certainly right up to the 70s and 80s as well. But in those days, it was very much unheard of for a woman to have a child out of wedlock, and let alone a black child in Ireland. So very unusual circumstances he was born into, but he had a lot of struggles growing up, and he dealt with them all face on, as he did with everything in his career. Had a love for music at a very young age, played in bands in his teenage years. I believe he was in a band called the Black Eagles. He was also in a band called Skid Row with Bruce Shields, and then he went on to form his own band, Thin Lizzy. So they started off as a three-piece. It was his school friend, Brian Downey, on drums, and Phil on bass and vocals, and they brought in a guitar player from Belfast called Eric Bell. They released 3 albums with that three-piece, and this was one of them, Shades of a Blue Orphanage. So this one, just see, does it say what year it was actually released on here? No, I think it was the late 1960s this one was released. I don't have the exact date to hand here, but this album was released. Pretty good album, to be honest. Like Buffalo Girl, the original version of Sarah, Shades of a Blue Orphanage. There's some great tracks on this one, and it was really a kickstart into what they were doing. But their third album, in my opinion, was the best from the Mark 1 lineup of Thin Lizzy. It's this one here, Shades of a Blue Orphanage. You can see an absolutely fantastic psychedelic cover there. This band were really trailblazing. There was nobody in Ireland doing music like this at this time. Absolutely phenomenal. This one was, again, I don't have the exact date it was released, but I believe it was the late 1960s. And again, this one was absolutely fantastic. So they had songs like Mama Nature Said, which is a brilliant song, Slow Blues, The Rocker, which is an absolute classic, and then Vagabonds of the Western World, I'm Gonna Creep Up on You. Absolutely brilliant, this album. And they also had a hit with the traditional Irish song. It was called Whiskey in the Jar. Not something they really wanted to do, but something the record label kind of pushed them to do. They were having a bit of fun with the song, but it's gone on to be a legendary song, and it really put Thin Lizzy on the map. And I think it was 1973. But yeah, so at that point then, they were, not a well-known band, but they would have been starting to make some inroads. I believe Whiskey in the Jar got to number 6 in the UK. But Eric Bell capitulated, left the band, and he was replaced by 2 guitar players. Now, Gary Moore filled in for a little bit, but eventually it was Brian Robertson, who was a Scottish guitar player from Glasgow, and an American guitar player from California called Scott Gorham. So Robertson and Scott Gorham joined in guitar. The first album they released was this one here, Nightlife. So we were getting into the Thin Lizzy sound here with dual guitars. The production's not great on this one. This one was released in 1974. The guitars didn't sound heavy enough, really didn't sound like Thin Lizzy, but it was the first step in the direction that they were going to go to. Then they released this one, Fighting. This was in 1975, and this is an absolute classic. There's some great songs on here. You could hear the production going up a gear. Rosalie is on this one, Suicide, Wild One, Fighting My Way Back, King's Revenge, Ballad of a Hard Man. Absolutely brilliant. Then they followed that up with Jailbreak, which I actually don't own a copy, but I'm planning to change that in the next few months. I'm just waiting to pick it up somewhere. I haven't seen it anywhere. And then the same year then, or was it the year after, 1977, they released Johnny the Fox, which is for many people considered their best album. So Jailbreak obviously had the song Jailbreak, it had Emerald, and it had The Boys Are Back in Town, classic songs. This one had Johnny, Borderline, Don't Believe a Word, that's an absolutely brilliant song, Fool's Gold, Massacre, absolutely brilliant. So that's Johnny the Fox. Wedged in there, they also had this album, Live and Dangerous, which was considered a live album, but there was a little bit of touching up in the studio carried out. But this one was the big one for the band. This really put them on the map along with Jailbreak. They started to make some inroads in America, but they were hampered by Phil's sickness. I think he got a bout of hepatitis, and also Brian Robertson. He was involved in a fight the night before they were due to fly out to America, and it was really not a good time for the band. There was a lot of drug consumption at this time as well. They were just about to start breaking it, but they were hit with a lot of bad luck. But this album stands out as, you know, a great record of the band live, and it's still to this day one of the best live rock albums of all time. Stands up there with the best of them. Absolutely brilliant. It's got all their hits from that time, including Bad Reputation, and that album was released around the same time. Again, I don't own it. I have the t-shirt here. This is the t-shirt cover for Bad Reputation, but I just don't own the album as yet. So then with Bad Reputation, you'll notice there's only 3 members in the front. Brian Robertson, he didn't turn up for the photo shoot, and also he had very little involvement in the album. But Dancing in the Moonlight's on this album. Bad Reputation, absolutely brilliant, top notch. And that one's actually produced by Tony Visconti, who famously worked with David Bowie. So yeah, they were on a different level now at this point, Thin Lizzy, but still hadn't really cracked America. Then Brian Robertson left the band fully, or was sacked, whatever, depending on what source you read, and they went on to make this album, the Black Rose album, which is considered an absolute masterpiece by Thin Lizzy fans. It's the only full-length album that Gary Moore appears on, and it's absolutely phenomenal. Gary Moore is a phenomenal guitar player, one of the most talented guitar players of all time, but from a blues guitar player point of view, and even jazz fusion, he's just brilliant. He's absolutely class. Has a great awareness of the neck, and he's just able to get these fantastic sounds out. He knows the right parts that are needed for the songs, and he slotted into Thin Lizzy absolutely perfectly. Didn't overplay but didn't underplay, and was able to serve the songs really well and help out with some songwriting contributions. So on this album here, Black Rose, we've got the title track, which the album finishes with, 7 minutes and 6 seconds of absolute bliss, Celtic rock, I suppose you'd call it. Then you've got Anything You Want to Do, Toughest Street in Town, Waiting for an Alibi, Sarah, Got to Give It Up, absolutely brilliant. So that's Black Rose. Then they parted ways with Gary Moore. I think Gary was getting fed up of the band relying so heavily on drugs, particularly Phil and Scott. So he decided to leave actually halfway through the US tour, and Phil called up Midge Ure to finish up the sessions, or the remaining tour dates on the tour. And Midge came out, in fairness to him, finished up the tour dates. He said himself he was learning the songs on the plane on the way out to America, and he's not really like a fast technical guitar player, but he filled in for the band, and by all accounts did a decent enough job. And then Snowy White joined, and they released 2 albums, of course, Chinatown, another classic, and this one here, Renegade. Now Snowy had previously played with Pink Floyd. But yeah, he does a good job on these two albums, to be fair. He doesn't really put a foot wrong, but I don't think he was as good as Gary Moore, and he certainly wasn't, didn't have the flair of Brian Robertson either, especially live. So Thin Lizzy were really in a sort of an awkward period at this time in the late 1980s, or sorry, early 1980s, should I say. Snowy left the band. I think he was getting fed up as well with the band. They had brought in a keyboard player at that point as well for this album, Renegade, and they decided to bring in a young guitar player called John Sykes in, and they finished out in 1983, the year I was born, with this one, Thunder and Lightning, an absolute classic, considered very much a heavy metal record by a lot of people. It has songs on it like Thunder and Lightning, the title track, and Cold Sweat, which are, heavy songs, but it's also got songs like The Sun Goes Down, The Holy War, Baby Please Don't Go. So really, really good album, in my opinion, by the band, and a great way to end on a high. Phil then went on and worked on some solo projects. So he worked on the Solo in Soho record and the Yellow Pearl record. I have this album here I picked up a few years ago. This one is actually a collection of all his best solo work. So most notably, there was a song called Old Town that he wrote. It was about Dublin, and fantastic video, and that was one of the standout tracks from Phil's solo career. But he also had songs like Yellow Pearl, King's Call, Solo in Soho, Ode of a Black Man, Kathleen. There's some great tracks on this. So yeah, I really do like some of Phil's solo stuff as well. It wasn't all bad. And then he also had a band called Grand Slam, which wasn't as successful as Thin Lizzy, and I don't think any band could be as successful as Thin Lizzy, but I think Phil was always looking to push the boundaries. I think he also had a band called the Greedy Bastards with some of the members of the Clash as well, I believe. So he was looking to innovate and get into punk. I think he did some work with Mark Knopfler as well. So he wasn't afraid to try new things. But unfortunately, all his drug abuse and his lifestyle caught up with him. And in 1985, at the end of the year, he was admitted to hospital with pneumonia as a result of drug addiction. And unfortunately, he lost his battle on the 4th of January 1986. And yeah, things were never the same again. Thin Lizzy's legacy lives on, and as an Irish band and a rock band, even a band from this part of Northern Europe, he really put it on the map. And it's funny because Thin Lizzy are bigger now than they ever were. And I watch a lot of YouTube channels, like American YouTube channels that follow good hard rock music, and people like Pete Pardo and Brandon Snyder, and they speak very fondly of Thin Lizzy. They're one of these bands that have a phenomenal legacy, and I think if they were still around today, if Phil was still around today, they'd probably still be touring, and they'd be absolutely massive, and he would have been delighted to see that. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be. He passed away too young, and left behind this legacy, and it wasn't until all these years later that Thin Lizzy are really getting the credit that they deserve. But definitely one of the best rock bands of all time, one of my favourites. Phil was a musical hero for me. The guitars in Thin Lizzy, one of the reasons I started playing guitar, picked up guitar. This was one of the first albums I ever bought. It's the Wild One collection by Thin Lizzy, absolutely brilliant. And for me, they're one of the best bands of all time. Even the fact that they're Irish is great, but it's not because they're an Irish band. They're just one of the best bands of all time. And make sure you listen to Phil today, and just remember what a legacy this band has. Okay, I'll talk to you on the next one, and bye for now.